Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with the Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your Rattlecast number 194. So glad you could join me. Those who could at this early time. It's always interesting to do a show at a different time to see, to kind of test whether or not the time we usually do it is right. So we'll see if more people show up or fewer. But before I begin, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do this because we love poetry, and I know you do too, so please do click the like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications. Leave reviews on any podcasting platforms you're listening to this on. You can listen to it on Spotify or iTunes or Amazon or whatever you have. There's some way you can leave a review or something. So please do if you would. Now, today's guest is Frank Dullaghan, and that's why we're at the early time. It's very late in the UK where Frank is. It's like 1 a.m. At the regular time, so we moved the show up. But before we start with that, we're going to go to our Poets Respond Poets like we usually do, and from Italy now. So it's an international show. Marc Di Martino is here. Hey, Marc, how you doing? I'm great. Thanks so much for being here. It's always great to have. It's just such a great coincidence that we were having an early show today, so you could join us. I know you're a regular viewer, you just mentioned, but yeah, I assume after the fact the next day because it's very late in Italy where you usually are.
I usually listen as a podcast, actually, like in my car.
Yeah.
When I'm driving to or from work. Always sometime during the week when I have some time.
Yeah, perfect.
But I do try to keep up.
Yeah, that's the idea. So I'm glad it works out. So your poem, Technicolor Coronation Day, I think everybody can imagine what the poem was about, but can you talk a little bit about what inspired it and how the poem came to be?
Yeah, basically, obviously it was inspired by last Saturday's coronation. And I'm really kind of a curmudgeon about all things, having to do with the royal family, be it, weddings, births, deaths, funerals, and now coronations. I really couldn't care less. I think the whole thing, not to offend anybody, obviously, but that's my opinion. It seems like an anachronism in today's society. I feel the same way about the things that happen in the Vatican here where I live. And anyway, I did see a tweet that said all of this was better in black and white. And it kind of struck a chord in me. And I kind of immediately, I don't know, this line, Technicolor Coronation Day, came into my head. And I thought, it scans pretty well. It's a nice I am. And it just kind of fell into a villanelle, which is a form that I really like. And I don't write in very often because it's kind of difficult. And this one sort of wrote itself, I'd say. Once I got the third line, I realized they worked together, and then everything kind of fell into place.
Yeah, well, the best poems tend to do that. Why don't you go ahead and read it? Technicolor Coronation Day. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, good. All right. Technicolor Coronation Day. It's Technicolor Coronation Day. Our phones and television screens are lit. All skeletons are neatly tucked away. Scepter in hand, the king makes his entree. An old man no one likes, a bore and twit. It's Technicolor Coronation Day. I'm sitting this one out. I'd rather, say, read a good book or pick a nasty zit. All skeletons lie neatly tucked away in closets where they frolic, bump, and sway. Refresh your feeds, there's no mistaking it. It's Technicolor Coronation Day. And now it's time for everyone to pray in grave solemnity. Ignore the pit of skeletons so neatly tucked away. The king will sit above the noisome fray, his majesty a target for their wit. It's Technicolor Coronation Day. All skeletons mute, neatly tucked away.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, that's a villanelle with that refrain. Why do you think the refrain works for certain poems and not others?
I don't know, but I think that writing this, I kind of figured out after years of chipping away at the villanelle, how to write one. And I think what you need to do is the first and third lines have to be, obviously they have to rhyme, but they also have to make sense as a couplet at the end. And so what I did was I wrote out all the rhymes I could think of using day, and then I got the second line lit, and I just made about a half a page of rhymes for each of them and picked out what I thought were the most interesting words. And once I got the first and third lines and I realized I made a couplet at the end that kind of worked, then what you do is you kind of try to vary it as you go down the villanelle. And sometimes you add an extra word or you change a word or you make it bleed into maybe the next line or the previous line. And see how much kind of variation you can bake into something which is already half baked once you have the first two lines.
Hmm.
So it's this weird push and pull between something which is already half written and something which you have to kind of push and pull like silly putty to kind of make it do something different and unexpected. It's a pretty tricky thing to write,
Yeah,
actually.
well, it's nice to have some lighter poem in verse, which people always ask for but never send. That is always, it's been for 20 years the bane of my existence. It's been the fact that people say, "Why is there not more humor, and why is there not more formal poetry?" And I'm like, well, why don't you send it? So you
Well, there
did, and I
is, there
appreciate
is.
it.
Yeah, the internet is full. Journals are full of formal poetry, really good stuff too.
Hmm.
But I guess they're just not sending it to you.
um,
Send it, send it.
yeah, definitely. I always say that. And then one more thing I want to ask about, someone wrote back and said that it was mean spirited to say an old man no one likes, a bore and a twit, and to describe the king
Mm,
that way because he's a human being too, and not just the king. What do you say
true.
to that comment?
There are lots of human beings who are unlikable, who are bores, and who are twits, and much worse than that. In my estimation, and I'm no royalist, and he even as the prince, I mean, I think pretty much public opinion was never really on his side. Nobody ever really thought of him as a charming man or as somebody who was, highly interesting as a human being,
Hmm.
unlike his ex-wife Diana or his mother Elizabeth. And so him becoming king doesn't really change that for me anyway.
Yeah.
So he's just a human being, I'd say,
Hmm.
like all of us. He's
Yeah.
nothing more, nothing less, despite the noisome fray.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Mark. It's always a pleasure having
Thank
your
you,
work
Sam.
and I just love having a variety of poems. It's great to have this one. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. That was Mark Allen Martino with yesterday's poem, Technicolor Coronation Day. Now we're going to switch to tomorrow's and get a little preview of Matt Dhillan's Poem with a Penis. And so, hey, Matt, how you doing? You got to unmute.
Hey,
Hey, yeah,
I'm
good to
doing
see you.
good.
Yeah, so this is a poem about guns, which we have so many poems submitted about that. It's probably the number one topic in Poet Respond over the last 9 years we've been doing it because there's so many shootings in the U.S. They're so tragic and traumatic on sort of the nation's I don't know psyche, I guess you could say, and
Yeah.
so it's always difficult because there's so many poems about mass shootings and just gun violence in general. It's always hard to stand out and do something in a different way. So, how did you approach this poem? Like, why did you confront the poem in the way that you did, and how did it come to be?
I think I guess the thing that spurred the poem was thinking about masculinity and how it relates to gun violence because over 95% of mass shooters are men. And so it just got me thinking more about like the symbols of power and how we think about power and how we think about strength and how we sort of kind of teach men to like value their capacity for violence and as like see that as their strength, as their like the way that they can use force as being the root of their power.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
it kind of evolved out of that.
yeah. Well, no one's heard it yet, so why don't you read it early on? Let's hear this poem. Poem with a penis. Go ahead.
Okay, here we go. I got it analog, so
Okay.
poem with a penis. Because a penis is just like a gun, a cowboy walks on screen with a heavy iron. Because a penis is just like a gun, boys are born with fingers on triggers, and the so many deer ripple in knee-high grass as if shaken out of a dream. 2, 4, 5. Because a penis is just like a gun, the boy knows desire is a kind of violence, leaving him laterally through a barrel. There will be holes in the steel of road signs and chipped from trees. You could walk back and forth in the emptiness he makes of love. Because a gun is just like a penis, You know, a man invented violence, his body a weapon, powder and the flower of fire on his lips. Because a gun is the shape of a penis, power is the shape of a gun, and killing is the shape of power, and his body is a fight waiting to happen. And it was through scab and bruise and fractured bone that he passed into manhood. Because a penis is just like a gun, he holds one. Its smooth chrome a call. Here is a hurt made just for you. You will know yourself by the wound.
Yeah, powerful poem there. That was Matt Dhillan's Poem with a Penis. And it really gets at something that I think we don't talk about enough, which is that I think the reason why we don't solve the gun issue is because we need gun culture to support military culture, which supports imperialist culture, and it all ties together with that. You know, it's the, you know, all the video games with guns, all the toy guns, all that all feeds into this machine that we've been, you know, churning out since for the last 150 years or more. And so it's a great way to put the poem there. How long was this poem in process, would you say? Because that's one of the things with these poems about guns, because it has, like, every week it could be about any gun shooting, because there's, I don't know how many, since the beginning of the year, hundreds of mass shootings, I assume. So was this a poem that was percolating for a while, or did some kind of levee get breached and it poured out? Because it feels like one of those poems, like Marc was talking about before, that just had a kind of a flow outward, where it seems like it wrote itself almost.
Yeah, it wasn't that long. It was about a week that it took me to write it, and you're right. There was such an alarming quantity of gun violence in the news. It was impossible to ignore. And I think I never really set out to write about gun violence, or thought I would, or like take a stance on the issue. I mean, I know that there's going to be so many people thinking about gun violence and how to solve that problem. And I didn't really have an opinion about that, but the symbology of that image of masculinity and guns, and how you can trace guns back through American history and their representation in so many ways. The harmony of those images kind of just motivated me to keep writing about it. And I think that's why that line's repeated so many times in the poem.
Yeah. Well, that's what makes it feel like it. It's just like a release of some kind. And so, yeah, really powerful poem. I'm looking forward to sharing that with everybody through our distribution channels tomorrow. But thanks so much for joining us today, Matt, and previewing it for everybody watching the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, take care. And once again, that was Matt Dhillan with tomorrow's Poem with a Penis. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, who, of course, is Frank Dullaghan. So sit tight, and I will be right back with Frank. Thanks again for your patience. Today's guest, like I said, is Frank Dullaghan, the interviewee in the Irish Poets issue that we just came out with. Frank is an Irish writer living in the UK after 15 years in the Middle East and Far East. He holds an MA with a distinction in writing from the University of South Wales. He's been widely published in literary journals and has 5 collections published by Cinnamon Press, most recently in The Coming of Winter. Secrets of the Body, a pamphlet of poems about the mythical Pope Joan, was published by Eyewear Publishing. He's also published 2 collections of haiku. We can talk about that too. In Dubai, he was an active member of various spoken word collectives and has a screenplay for the short film Melody that won the Audience Award in the Mumbai Women's International Film Festival. He's got a whole bunch of other things going on, as always. And here he is, Frank Dullaghan. Hey, Frank, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. I always love your work, and I'm looking forward to sharing poems and talking poetry a little more in more detail maybe than we did in the interview in Rattle. Why don't you go ahead and start out with reading a poem?
Okay, this one is called Dingle in the Coming of Winter, and it gave the name to my last collection. I should maybe just say a couple of things. One is that Dingle is on the southwest coast of Ireland, very rugged landscape. It's on a peninsula that leads out into the Atlantic, so quite wild sort of weather. And also it's an area that's been designated as a Gaeltacht. And that's an area where the majority of the people, their native language or their main language is actually Gaelic. So they speak at home and speak to each other in Gaelic rather than English. So when I come off later, I talk about the old language, I'm referring to Gaelic. Dingle in the Coming of Winter. So much of it is memory. The sea slapping at the harbour wall, the fishing boats nodding to each other from their moorings. Some days the mountains are misted, vision limited to what's close at hand, a murder of crows revelling in their black arts, staking out the green between the harbour and the road, goose-stepping the curb, cocking their heads at any trespass. The road itself seems a little stiff as it moves up past the bright pastels of houses and shop fronts. I stop to rest at a shop window. Young girls conspire in the doorway, giggling in the old language, replenishing the myth that youth lasts forever. Rain gathers in the sky like an argument. In evening bars, lines of glasses uncloud to black. But there is tiredness too. The months have slowed. Cold has found its way into bone. I came here feeling the need to drown in the untamed weather, escape, be in Dingle in the Coming of Winter. Understand that this is just the way of things, land trying to outlive the sea, winter tapping at the door, selling its soft white promise of sleep.
Yeah, that was Dingle in the Coming of Winter, that I think the title poem from your most recent book, and a beautiful one too. I just love that last line in particular, selling its soft white promise of sleep. Can you talk a little about how you got into poetry? I know we talked about this in the interview, but for people who haven't read that, what was your poetry journey like? Was it something that you always wanted to do, or was it something that you picked up later in life?
Well, I sort of tinkered around with poetry when I was at university, but I didn't write much, and it didn't really earn the name poetry. It was terrible stuff. But in my career, I ended off in financial services business and worked for Lehman Brothers in London. And that's a very pressured environment. And I found myself burning out in that job and decided I needed to do something about it. And so I made 2 choices. One was to move into martial arts to, just get myself fit. And the other thing was to do something that I would have the same level of passion about and that would absorb me. And I decided that would be poetry. And so I started writing poetry at that stage. And that was back in the mid to late 80s, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I remember, I'm fascinated by that, just that sense of trying to better yourself in both ways. And the idea that the, getting physically fit and working out, doing martial arts, there's a component on the mental side that has to be kept fit too, which I think is really the purpose of poetry. Is to keep us sharp and engaged with the world and finding new meaning and creating things. Do you find that that it changed you very much? Like do you think that obviously doing martial arts, you got physically fit, you could see a difference. Could you feel a difference mentally? Could people tell the difference around you when you started? You took that break from working so hard and started writing poetry?
I think probably I became a little more relaxed. I had a different outlet. And became interested in, all of the arts. And so I guess that will have affected my personality. Would have added a dimension that wasn't there before. Mm-hmm. And poetry is a great outlet for expressing and trying to understand the things around you. We often write a poem and we think it's going to be about one thing, but it ends off being about something totally different. And I'm always interested in the underlying narrative of a poem that might not be on the surface level.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's read another poem before we talk a little more about that. So next up we have Small Town Brewery Blues.
Yeah, I wanted to give you a selection here. So I've got 5 collections. So I stole from all of them. This is my hometown of Dundalk, and it's set about 1973, and it's the first sort of probably real job I had, and it was just prior to going to university. Small Town Brewery Blues. It was down a wet alley between some shops. Each morning that summer between the shops, I walked through its sloppy yard, the smell of hops. I took bottles off a line, placed them in a crate. Warm bottles of local beer, 12 to a crate, earning money for uni from morning till late. Most lads left school for the production line, walked out of school to a production line, money in the pocket, a life of grime. Stayed where they started, brought good money home, raised a family with the money brought home. Hard-working men gave an edge to the town. When stacking the crates, a bottle could explode. Glass glittered the air when a bottle could explode. One lad lost an eye as he stacked his load. They gave the dangerous work to casual labour, jobs no one wanted, done by casual labour. We needed the money, were employed by the hour. Kept my face turned away when I built my stack. Blindly crashed crates together, constructing my stack. Never complained, took the glass on my back. When summer was over, I left that town, put my books in a bag and left that town. I kept the boots they lent me and moved on, understood now how hard work makes the man.
Yeah, and that was Small Town Brewery Blues from one of the older books by Frank Dullaghan. And what is that form, Frank? That's something that I've never seen before, I don't think. That repetition of the first 2 lines, and then the third line, there's a rhyme, if everybody can see here.
Yeah, it's meant to sort of imitate the blues, sort of. You listen to a blues song, mm-hmm. They have that sort of rhyme in it. Now, this doesn't follow that exactly, but it's to give that impression. It wants to be slightly folky, bluesy type of song. And it's a form I don't know whether I come up with it myself or I may have seen it somewhere, mm-hmm. but it's one that I've played with a few times.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder. I mean, maybe we could call it the Dullaghan or something. It's always good to have a form named after you. I've never seen it before, and I've seen millions of poems, and so it's really fascinating. So how the repetition plays with it too. We saw the refrain in Marc's poem, the beginning poem about the Coronation Day. Yeah, in the Villanelle. And there's something about the way music generates poetry. It's the sounds that push poems forward. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how, you follow the language, because you do so clearly in all these poems?
Yes, I think I like repetition if it's done well. And I think I learned a lot about repetition when I was part of spoken word collectives in Dubai, where some of the spoken word artists are very, very clever repetition and then usurping that sort of that repetition by changing it a bit. So you have to listen clearly. And so I like doing that sort of thing. And I think also repetition, I was going to say hammers home the message, but by stating the thing twice, you're sort of being quite emphatic about it. You're putting it down there. And for some reason it feels a little more solid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it definitely does. You mentioned, I think you said that your early poems were rubbish, I think is the word you used.
Yes.
Yes. So what makes a poem rubbish, and what makes a poem like good or not rubbish? Like what is the difference, and what are the insight that you learned along the way to make poems sing and not make you feel that way?
I think probably by reading a lot of poetry.
Mm-hmm.
I was quite ferocious in my reading of poetry, and I think you begin to respond to certain poems, and then you enjoy it. But then if you want to write, you've got to go back and read it again and find out what was it that solicited that response from you, and you begin to learn. And quite often it's the image, it's the metaphor, it's the way it's constructed and put together. And my earlier poems were, sort of doggerel rhymes. They were prosy. They didn't have that extra layer of sophistication. I think poems need to have more than one layer for them to stand up. They should, invite the reader to go back and read it again and get something different and something extra from the second reading. And I think if it does that, it's successful. I'm not suggesting that my poems do that, but that's what I aspire to.
Well, I think they definitely do. How do you find that second level? How do you find layers in the poem? Like say you're writing out a poem, you're thinking back to a story or describing a scene. How do you find the next level to go to? Because that's the thing when we workshop poems on our Friday workshop. A lot of times we'll say like this poem doesn't have a sense of it went anywhere. It only had one level, to read it. Like I say, like the speaker knew the conclusion at the beginning of the poem is usually a problem. How do you find your way into a new layer in poetry?
If you're lucky, it comes. And I think if you've been writing for a long time, it will sort of happen. But the other thing is, I think widely about the theme that you're writing about, so that you've got lots of different ideas and they all come and inform the poem. But also, I think it comes from the big thing we keep telling people is to rewrite. And don't just write the poem and think it's done. It's not done. And the rewriting quite often will give another insight, particularly if you're disciplined enough to put it away for a while and come back to it. And that other insight into the poem starts getting written into it. And so the process over a period of time is what does it. I go back to some of the poems in my first collection, and I've obviously got lots of drafts of them, but the very first draft of a lot of those poems are very, very different, just don't have it at all. And it was this process of writing and rewriting that did it. And quite often for me, it was the process of sending them out to magazines and collecting rejection slips. And every time the rejection slip came back in, because these are it is when you posted them, when a rejection slip came back in, I would look at the poem and think, oh, no wonder they rejected this. Look, it doesn't do this or it doesn't do that. And I'd redo it. And so I was teaching myself to rewrite and to add something to it. And I think that then becomes the habit.
Mm-hmm.
You go back and you don't necessarily accept the first write. Although sometimes it does. Sometimes it just comes and, you just turn your blanket to the east and, bow down and say thank you.
Yeah, that is something I miss. It's been a long time since, the majority of submissions, and actually, very few submissions even come through the mail anymore. But when I used to send submissions out, you'd have to send that self-addressed stamped envelope for all these youngsters out there who don't even know what we're talking about. And they would send back like their rejection note, but with the poems too, because everybody didn't want to waste the paper and having to type it up like, back when it was a typewriter.
Yeah.
And so you'd actually open the letter, you'd see the rejection, and then you'd see the poems that were rejected with like fresh eyes, because it was like, this is how they saw it as it came to them. And I remember that experience. And a lot of times just recognizing that a poem that you thought when you sent it out was great didn't work when you read it with that frame. So that is something that we kind of miss out on with Submittable, and you just get the rejection, and you don't have to see the poem again in all its stark nakedness.
Yeah, indeed. And there's that sort of you keep trying to school yourself into not sending it out as soon as you've written it, because that creative surge that you have, which is why we write poetry quite often, it sort of dissipates over a day or two. And if we send it out when we're on that high, there's a good chance it's not going to make it.
So how do you re-enter a poem? That's always the problem I have if I'm trying to revise something. Is like I feel like I'm a different person, and it doesn't feel like it has the same energy that it did before when I originally wrote it, with that spark of kind of something flowing out. Is there a way that you can get back into the poem after those months that you'd been waiting?
I think there are a number of ways. Quite often you just read it through and you make some small changes. That's the easy way because it's already formed, it's there. But one of the things that, or some of the things that I've done is I try to remember the poem without reading it or having put it away for a day or two, and then get a blank piece of paper and write it again.
Mm-hmm.
Then see what the differences are and play with the shape of it and things like that.
That's interesting.
So
do you find when you do that what you remember is the stuff that worked, or what you remember is the stuff that didn't work?
I generally find that I remember the stuff that's the strongest in the poem, although I might miss something. So then I will steal from both pieces to come up with a hybrid.
Yeah. Well, let's hear another poem. What do we have next? There is Nowhere Left is the one I've got next.
Yeah. This is an example of a political poem. When I was based in Dubai, I wrote quite a lot of political based poems. I think I became more politically conscious at that time, and the people I mixed with certainly assisted me in that. So this is about the refugee problem, and I think it's a poem that's still fresh today. There is nowhere left. We move through your borders, your villages, your countryside. We walk with our lives on our backs, our children drunk from walking by the hand, our pasts blown up behind us. We move through your language, your donated food, your fields of tents. We walk without hope, as if this is our new reason for being, this great walk, this achievement of pushing the miles behind us. We move through your culture, your storytelling, your politics. We walk against the turn of the earth, east to west, our great numbers slowing its rotation. We will move through your memories, your imagination, your knowledge of yourselves. Our footsteps will dog the rhythm of your days. We will walk across your clean bed linen, your tablecloths, your conversations. There is no stopping now that we have started. There is no use erecting barriers, arguments, prayers. For you too are moving. You too are losing your place.
Yeah, and that was There Is Nowhere Left, one of Frank's many political poems. In your book, In the Coming of Winter, I remember, has a really stark turn to the political too, where you sort of don't see it coming, then it hits really hard, that like maybe 8 poems in or so. What do you feel like, why do you write political poems? What is the purpose of it for you? Is it more to come to terms yourself with your own sort of feelings and your own reaction and your emotions that go along with the politics? Or is it to try to change the world in some way? Do you think a poem can change the world? Is there one sort of direction or the other you go when you're writing political poems?
I don't think so. I think really poetry is as much about witness as it is about anything else. And so I think we have some sort of obligation to act as a witness for the world that we live in. And you probably see lots of political poems that come in response to, news items in your weekly poem that you do. And I think we have this desire to have a response and to have something to say. It may or it may not change the world, but it may change one person or it may even change yourself. And if it does that, it's doing a job. So I feel that it behoves us to deal with these subjects, difficult as they are in poetry, and to put them down.
Mm-hmm. And how do you go about doing that? Because one, the problem with political poems usually is there's a sort of a sense of like, we have such strong feelings about the topics that are political. I mean, we're sort of conditioned to have that. There's stuff we've thought about, and so we have this sense of these are my beliefs. And so getting to that extra layer that you were talking about before seems to be a difficult thing to do. And I think that's the problem with so many poems that we get as submissions to Poets Respond, is that the poet knew exactly what they wanted to say before they were going to say it. And so the poem ends up flat and sort of one-dimensional. And there's a sense of sort of preaching to the choir too, because it's like, you agree with these good values and I'm, saying that I have them, and and poetry has to do something more than that. So how do you approach a political poem so that it has the layers that you were talking about being necessary for a good poem before?
I think it's difficult, and certainly I'll have written a lot of political poems that never made it anywhere, apart from the bin. But sometimes in doing that, an idea will come out. So I think it's about finding a different angle for the poem. In this side, it was about the walking, it's about refugees, and I remember thinking. And it hit me, I think, when I saw a news thing where the people in this queue who were walking were dentists and accountants and, school teachers. And I thought, this could be my life. This could be me. And that's why at the end, it impacts all of us. And of course, with global warming, we don't really know what's going to happen. There's that hint that, we can be all smug and feel happy in our Western culture that we're not suffering. But, guess what? We could be the next people that's in the queue trying to cross the border.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that, because one of the interesting things about you is you grew up in Ireland, but then you ended up having a career elsewhere, starting a business and being all over the world and the places that you lived. Was it that sense of moving around and seeing the world from different perspectives that made you engage more politically, do you think? Was that something that happened?
I would think that's definitely it, because I think if I'd remained in Ireland, I would have been listening to news coming from Ireland, and I wouldn't have maybe had the same insights. And when you meet different cultures and have good friends in different cultures, if they're really good friends, they will correct your misinterpretation of what's happening, and they will put you right. And those arguments and those debates inform you, and you become hopefully a little more humble, and realize that the fact that you've got a good life is an accident of birth and all the rest of it, and that you're not any more intelligent than people who are in a bad place. And so you do start becoming a bit more political, I think, when you see injustice and you need to get that sort of balance back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes me think of taking a comparative religion class in college and talking about and realizing how all religions are sort of moving from a self-centered perspective to a collective-centered perspective, and not just about yourself, but about the whole collective as you expand outward in your consciousness into God, if it's a God of that religion, or the Tao or whatever it is. And so it seems like that when you left your local part, you sort of built up a perspective that encompassed the whole world instead. And do you think that's the journey that we're all on, is to start thinking more of other people than ourselves?
I think so. I think if you give more credence to other people, you become a better person. And if you become just focused on yourself, you become too self-centered, become a narcissist, and you have a very small life. Maybe you enjoy it, I don't know, but probably other people don't enjoy you. I think we have to develop a healthy level of humility. And they do say that traveling is, broadens your perspective. I think that's true. It's because you see other cultures and you realize there's a lot more out there. And that's always good for us. And I think it does inform our writing as well. I think it enriches, or has the potential to enrich your writing.
Hmm. Yeah, and that was what was so interesting about this issue too, is that there was such a sort of a diaspora sense to it. There's so many Irish expatriates living in all different places, and the issue has, poets in Australia and New Zealand, and you were in Dubai. Um, we talked about this a little bit in the interview, but what is it about Ireland that lets people take that journey, and how does that affect the poetry, do you think?
I think Ireland has always been a country with high levels of emigration. Um, and so I think it's almost part of the culture. There was a short period when it was going the other way, but I think it's back to people leaving. And so I think there was an expectation that a certain percentage of people leave. But also because they spread out across the world, there is Irish communities in all of these places. And, people go to those communities and mix with them. I think that probably informs the writing. I think also it being a country that's in the Northern Hemisphere, it gets dark in the winter. So, you get the usual things like storytelling and music that seems to go with those sorts of winter evenings. And that becomes part of the culture too.
That's really interesting. I never thought of that fact. That it's even having seasons. Having a more extreme winters where you're bound and snowbound. Like it snowed in 1 week. It snowed 7 feet here, and you could do nothing but read and share stories and play games. But there was nowhere to go and nothing to do, which probably plays into the culture of literature. Yeah, that's interesting. So let's do another poem. We have Songbird next.
Yes. Okay. And this was for a friend of mine in Dubai. And it's about Lebanon and the situation in Lebanon at that time. Songbird. She opens the gate of her rib cage, lets the bird of her heart fly out. Away, she says, showing it the bitten moon, the cut-out trees against the grey blanket of sky. Fly, she tells it, pointing to the shivering sea, the hidden mountains beyond. For what is there here for it but the need to go blind, to lose its voice, to break its back under the weight of each day? Here they polish their pain into currency. Here they trade in death. Here they torture the small white body of the soul until it gives up its ghost, leaving them to their brutal flesh and bone. Go, she cries to her heart, and do not return, for they will clip your wings, strangle your song.
Yeah, that was Songbird for Z Tripoli, August 2013. Another beautiful poem, and there's just so much beautiful music in all of these poems. How did you develop that ear for the music? I know you mentioned reading a lot, but was it stuff you read as a kid? Is it because a lot of things come out of nursery rhymes, and we sort of engage with poetry in that way very early on, and then the more we read, the more we develop that ear almost. And I think a lot about how I have no sense of pitch or anything because I don't do much music. And so, but if you were trained on that, you would learn more music. So how did you develop that ear for poetry?
I think some of it will come from song, obviously. And there was always a lot of music and song in my family and still is. That's still there. But I think just the poets that I was reading at school and that I came back to, the Irish poets like Yeats, was very, very musical. And then some of the English poets like Dylan Thomas. So at that time, the poets I were reading were very much formal poets with a lot of musicality in their writing. And I like that. And I like the softness of the images. And when you put those two things together, there was a sort of magic to it. And I always wanted to try and capture that if I could.
Yeah, and there's something interesting too in your writing where it's mostly free verse. If you're counting the feet, there's a lot of variations, but free verse in the traditional way, in which it's still sort of tied to verse. You can still hear, like in that poem where we had that small town brewery poem. There was the repetition, but there was also a sort of a metrical cadence to the lines, but then the feet varied a lot. How conscious are you of that as you're writing a poem? Is that something that you try to do? Because there's a certain music to having that much variety, which is very different from a totally, non-metrical poem, and yet the meter isn't repeating.
Yeah, I'm not consciously writing in meter as such. But what I will do is when a poem looks finished and I'm close to it is I will read it aloud. And I think it should fit in with the normal cadence of your spoken voice. And if it doesn't do that, if you stumble over part of it, or if it doesn't read right, then there's a problem. And that's usually a problem with the meter. The metrics are just not working. And you go back and you fix that and you change that. And I suppose in the earlier days, I was writing sonnets and still write the odd one. And if I write a sonnet, I like it to be a proper sonnet, not a modern sonnet, which has just got, 14 lines. And they can be just 2 or 3 beats to the line. I like to try and have a proper sort of, Italian or English sonnet and write it that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's do another poem.
All right, this one is called Visitation. The year after she died, she came to the door and called. He answered as if no time had gone by. He let her step in. She was pale as the moon on a watery night, smelt of wet leaves and grass. The day wouldn't stay in the room. Her voice when she spoke, not more than a whisper of wind through the door jamb. Her eyes were dark in her head, stars gone cold. He stood with all of his hurt, just stared at her face. If he could, he'd have touched her, held her hard to his chest. But already the form that she had was dimming, losing its place. In the end, she just smiled, then dissolved on the air to his own slow implosion of heart. But then light came in at the window that had not been there before, and the day came back.
And that was The Visitation, or just Visitation, by Frank Dullaghan again, today's guest on the Rattlecast. I keep thinking about listening to just the beautiful sounds, and people are mentioning on the chat windows on YouTube and Facebook about how beautiful your poems are, how musical they are. And I keep being taken back to that idea of the darkness coming and having storytelling be a way to occupy the dark. And I wonder, what do you think the purpose of storytelling is? Why are we so drawn to it? And dating back even before the written word, storytelling around the fire was so important to us all and to the history of humanity. Why do you think that is? What do we get out of stories like this about visitation, which is, you're telling someone else's story here and sort of mythologizing something? Why do we do that? What is the drive that humans have to make stories like this?
I think some of it is to pass on histories and mythologies, and sometimes to pass on what maybe we consider to be wise. So wisdom comes down through the myths and the stories that are there. And also maybe help as a way of informing other people. So here is a poem about someone who has lost, a man who's lost his partner, but she comes back to him as a ghost. And nothing much happens. She's a ghost. He can't touch her. She doesn't satisfy his physical longing to have her back. But something does change at the end of the poem. And I think the story of the poem is that no matter how bad things are, change can happen, and there are ways of dealing with it. And I think maybe the storytelling aspect of poetry is just that. It's that ability to pass on a message, and people get it better if they've got images or they've got those kinds of words than if they have if you just tell them straight. This extra layer we talked about in poetry is what gives it to them, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's keep the poems coming. The morning after is next.
The morning after. The look in her eye helped me recall it. I remember how the moon bounced along the tree line, how the road kicked back behind me as I sped, slicing the air with the bullet of my face, my muscles full of the journey's song, my heart loud as a laugh, keeping time in my ears. And before that, tumbling out of bed in the dark, my fingers clenched, my fists hardening, my toes fusing into hoof, spine stretching back and my neck arching. I remember the walls of the room like a cage, the need to burst through wind, to pound the road, the earth, and the look in her eye when I stamped and turned, tossing my head against the lacy frill of her lampshade, causing light to dance, wink off the gilt handles of her wardrobe, lick a shine up her long black riding boots, and her voice, husky, easy, easy, my love.
Yeah, that was The Morning After, another great poem by Frank Dullaghan. Frank, you've been around the world, so many different places, and always appreciating poetry everywhere you go and engaging with it in different ways. What's your sense of how poetry is treated in different places? In Ireland, there's such a rich history, with Yeats and everybody, and then going to Dubai, going to the Far East. You've been all over the place. Where is poetry's place? Like what is it like as a community of poets? Because one of the things I noticed doing this Irish Poets issue is that there's a real sense of community among the Irish poets. Like every time we post one of the Irish poems on social media, tons of other Irish poets are saying like congratulations and talking to each other in a way that that I'm not really used to seeing from other groups of people. So I don't know, is poetry different in Ireland? Is it different in Dubai? Is it different in the UK? What's your sense of that as far as the community that surrounds poetry?
I think there are differences, and I think since I came back to the UK from Dubai, I've immersed myself a bit more in contemporary Irish poetry, and reading poets, poets that are there, that have the same sort of sensibilities quite often as myself, and it's a sort of refreshing to do that. So I think, yes, different areas have a different kind of voice almost. But good poetry is good poetry, and it doesn't matter where it comes from. Sometimes it's even in translation. Like I was reading some translations of Russian poetry, and I was taken where I was thinking, I could learn something from this, the way the poem is put together. So I think I think each country has maybe its own type of voice, but if a poem is authentic, if it comes from the right place, and that doesn't mean that it's autobiographical, but it comes from the right sense of emotions and feelings that a person has, then that will come out in the poem and you will respond to it. So I don't think that answers your question, but I can't say that I could say this is a typical Arab poem, this is a typical American poem. I might use those phrases, like I would say American poetry is much more narrative driven and it tends to be structured more than lyrical. I'd say Arab poetry has a rich tradition. It's only beginning to come into English, where you have things like the ghazal, which has yet to really make its mark, I think, in Western poetry forms. But these are things that are there and you respond to them.
Mm-hmm. And what would you think of as like the character of Irish poetry? I mean, there's sort of, stereotypes that you would think of, Irish poets being, but contemporary poets now, what do you think they have in common in terms of what, how they're approaching poems?
I think they will have, as I have, picked up a lot of what we do from reading American poetry and English poetry, and any other English poems written in the English language, and that will inform what we write. But we still have the same historical poetry roots that goes back to Yeats and to Kavanagh and to those sorts of great names, and even to Heaney. I think there will be maybe more music. I think imagery, seems to me to be something that's important. There's an acceptance perhaps of myth and otherness and, having the presence of a dead person in a poem is not that strange in Ireland. It's an accepted thing. It's things that we do, whereas it might seem a little strange elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hear another one. Everything is next.
Yeah. Everything. Now everything has gone. The moon with its cold music, the slow white of the snow, the small turning of the leaf in the dark, the gate closing in on itself, the dustbin with its fat laugh, the buzz of the last van in the distance, you. There are books on the table, all the pages torn. The words have burned through the covers and smoulder on the floor. Now everything has gone. The trees with their tattered leaves, the birds with their crooked smiles, the sky that sat at the top of the steps, the coin in the gutter, the bicycle leaning on its shadow, the horizon's accident in the distance, you. See how the waters call. There is such room under the waves. You could go down into it like the sun and never be cold again. Now everything has gone. The walls with their vertical pain, the little hooks of the wind, the rustle of children in the park, the dark, the road's irresistible urge to travel, the creak of the stars as they shift their geometry, the galaxy, you.
Yeah, and that was Everything by Frank Dullaghan. And Frank, that poem has such an interesting form. People were looking on the screen now, but with those lists, starting with the definite article there, the moon, the slow white of the snow, the small turning of the leaf. How did that poem get to have its structure? It feels like the poem was born out of the structure itself almost, or was it one of those poems that it took a lot of revision to find what you were trying to get at?
I think the poem had some revision, but not that much. It started off, though, as about 3 or 4 pages, lists of pages, and it was from spontaneous writing. It was an experiment I was doing, this is an interesting maybe way of writing poetry. I don't do it often, but I was watching a movie, and as the movie was happening, I was writing. I was doing spontaneous writing. And things started to repeat themselves. An image started coming. And then I would leave the movie run and I would follow through on an idea and then I'd go back. So I was unable to revise as I'm writing. And I was just pages of stuff. But then certain patterns started to come out. And they eventually formed themselves into this sort of pattern. I had the list piece, which came from just very short lines. I had the sort of 4 lines, almost little lyrical poems that then embedded themselves. And initially it was just going to be Now Everything Is Gone. Because there was so much in it, I called it Everything. It's a poem about loss and how if you lose everything, it's devastating. And so the lists have that sort of effect, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they definitely do. And how often do you do that kind of thing? Because given you're so driven, I mean, you're starting companies and going around the world and, taking this break when you realize you're overworking and getting into martial arts and poetry at the same time, it feels like you have a systematic approach to life, maybe, where you tackle things through, the structure of how you're engaging with the world. And so do you do the same thing in poetry? Like, is that exercise you gave yourself to list thoughts as you were watching a movie? Is that a kind of thing that you often do to push yourself in different directions?
I'd like to say yes, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
I probably don't do it enough, but every so often I will. Maybe if I'm going through sort of a blank patch where there's not a lot coming, I look for some way to kickstart the creativity. And that was one of the ways. And then you work with the poem for maybe a week, pulling out the words. And if I do something like that, like write in response to a movie or to music or something, I usually put it away for quite a while because I want to have made that break with the original impetus to get the poem going, so I can come back into it in a different way.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned when we did the interview, which I think it was in December maybe last year, that you were in kind of a dry spell where the poems weren't coming as fast. Have you gotten out of that? Is that something? Are you still stuck in that phase?
No, I am writing a bit more now, and I'm reasonably happy with with what's coming out. But it's not. I used to be very prolific, but I'm not that anymore. But I think maybe when I was writing at a very high level, I was only getting it right maybe 20% of the time. So, now that I'm writing less, I might be 25% of the time.
Mm-hmm. And how organized are you with your drafts and things? Like, do you keep all the drafts of all your poems, and how much organization goes into that?
Yeah, I'm very organized. Maybe that's the piece that came over from the business side. I have files of poems by year and multiple drafts within those files. If the poem goes through, what I consider to be a major rewrite that's, it's changed it a lot, and I don't want to keep the original draft, I'll just overwrite it. But quite often I will have 2 or 3 versions of the poem where I'm making changes. And sometimes those changes happen just before I send it out. And then I have to copy it back into my file because it changed just as I had on the file to go out. So I will do things like that, and I will go back and look at them. And every so often I go back and look through a file at some of the poems, and some of them never made it out of the file. And if I think I can do something with it, I will. But a lot of them just sit there, talk to each other, keep each other company, and feel sad.
One of the things that's interesting too is that you spent a lot of time writing haiku as well, and you have 2 books of haiku, I believe. Is that something that you, because you stopped, I think, right? You haven't been writing haiku lately. Is it something that you were exploring and then sort of reached the end of what you could do with it, do you think? Or did you just move on for other reasons? Why did you have this haiku phase?
I think it happened early on because there was a sort of birth of haiku in the UK, and I got involved with it at a very early stage. And so I have a lot of haiku in some of the seminal anthologies of British haiku. And that sort of thing excited me and interested me. And then haiku became better known, and as a result, I think it became worse. So there's a lot of people writing haiku, and they think it's 575, and that's it. And it's not 575. It's not even an English poem. It's a Japanese poem that should be said in one breath. And 575 is an approximation of it. And all of the other rules that you can have around a haiku. I won't necessarily go into them here. But I still, from time to time, will come up with a haiku, but not in the way I used to. Mm-hmm. And it's not passion. Like other poetry is where my passion is. And I'm getting into other writing, screenplays and novels and short stories when I can. And I don't have that much time. So I'm always struggling for time to do stuff. And I guess haiku you can always have there, but I think it absorbs you a lot. And in some ways, this has just occurred to me, but in some ways I think it can satisfy you enough that you don't do the other stuff. And that's a danger, maybe.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. But yeah, I mean, if you're compelled to create something, then you create something, very short, and then that drive is satisfied. And so maybe you don't move on. Yeah. What are the screenplays and things like that you're working on? Are they similar in theme and style to your poetry, or are they very different?
No, they're very different. The novels are more sort of fantasy stroke science fiction type novels. And it's a much bigger platform to try and write. Nothing's happened with them, so I shouldn't sort of put myself forward here as a novelist. But I do have, and I then took one of the novels and turned it into a screenplay. And that's the first full screenplay that I've written. But it did get picked up by a company in California, and they have a shopping agreement on it, which means that they will try and shop it around Netflix and all the rest of it. And if they can get something going, then they'll get involved in it. But I think it's now probably out of its 12-month agreement phase, and it's still out there. It's probably still flicking around somewhere. So nothing's happened with it. But then that's the story of writing. You don't write because you're expecting great things to happen. You write because you want to learn how to do these things. And certainly novel writing was a long learning curve, and it was good. And it started the same way as poetry. It started as a terrible prose writing and then got better.
How do you? I mean, I'm sure you get discouraged, right? It's sometimes with how hard it is to publish and the reach of poetry in your writing. How do you get through that sense of discouragement, or do you not? Do you just focus on the writing and not have to worry about that?
I think you do have to focus on the writing, but I think maybe you get old. And one of maybe the benefits of getting old is, well, certainly I've found, is that you accept a lot more. You become more accepting of how things are, and you're chasing less. So, I recognize that at my age, I'm not probably never going to be a well-known novelist. I might not even get a novel published because I'm probably too old. There's ageism out there. Somebody's looking for the next bright young thing, and they're not going to look my way when they think in that sort of description. So I think you learn to accept that you're going to get lots of rejections when you send out. There are benefits in that, but you're writing foremost for yourself. And then if you can get published, and if you can get published in good places, that's the icing on the cake. So, and then you can get involved in things like we're doing here, and that's a big lift up. And a lot of the things that you do in the poetry world do that for people. It gives them that lift, and maybe that's the encouragement they need to go out and continue writing and develop their writing career.
What do you think? I just keep going back to this. We're entering this phase with the AI generating, poetry or essays or anything, and I think there's something really deep that we get out of being creative writers that's beyond even just the product. There's something in the process that makes us grow as human beings. And that's why, for me, I feel like we should have as many people writing poetry as possible. And that kind of should be the goal more than, the best poems ever being produced. It's that people are engaging with the world that way. Has that been your experience, that it gives life a purpose and it gives yourself more clarity of thought? And is that really the reason why you write?
For me personally, yes, it's an obsession, I think. Maybe it's just grown into an obsession, but I think I would probably have the jitters if I hadn't written for a long time. It would feel very strange if I wasn't creating. But, being involved as I was with spoken word and various else, you see some very young people beginning to write. You see them develop as well, which is even better. But quite often they find here's a way to express myself. This is something I can do. So I think it does add value to life that way. They find a new mode of expression, a new way of being almost, a new way of defining themselves. It may not be the greatest stuff ever. As an experienced poet, you can be very critical of what's coming out.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to stop yourself, because for that person at that stage in their writing career, this might be brilliant. So you have to see where it's taking the person and what it's adding to them. And so I always enjoy open mic events for that reason.
Do you find many, is it something that there's a scene where you are that you get to go to open mic events? Because I've, since the pandemic, I've had trouble finding, people coming out to do stuff seems to be a little more difficult to get people to do. People seem a little more homebound and sort of content with where they are, and there aren't as much interest in that. Do you find that?
Well, myself and my wife, Mari, just recently, about 6 months ago, found in a town close to us that there was an open mic event that was happening. So we went along to one, and it had exactly the same vibe as those events in Dubai had. Very strong community feel, good fun, and I was pleased to be there. We went back to the second one. We're waiting for to hear when the third one's happening. So I think that scene is still there. Certainly around London, I think it's still there, which is the capital. But yeah, maybe there's less of it than there was before, but it's still happening and it's coming back, I think.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. We're just about out of time. We have one poem left. Do you want to read that one?
Yep, this is called Telling Stories, and it's for my wife, Mari. You invited a teaching colleague and her husband over. We were young, learning to entertain. We didn't know them well. I had my instructions, when to pour the wine, not to hog the conversation. After dinner, we left the cooling coffee cups, the plate of untouched chocolate mints. I loosened myself into a sofa chair, a second bottle of red darkening in our glasses. They took a formal pose on the settee, knees together, hands in laps. I suppose they were learning too. He may have had his own instructions. But you were softened by the wine and went with habit. Sitting on the floor between my legs, head on my knee, we drank and told stories. Trying to coax some informality, some touch point with them, we bantered with each other. We were highly physical in those days, spending our time together on judo mats or in karate halls. So I expressed my disagreement with something you said by sliding a friendly choke around your throat. You countered not by breaking it, as I expected, it was loosely on, but by reaching back and grabbing me, where I'd brought my head softly to your shoulder, and rising slightly, pitched me out of the chair. Going over even in the lays of wine, I knew your move was technically superb and not to be outdone in front of guests. I twisted in midair to hook a leg, then swiveled to apply an arm lock, gain submission. We were high in the delirium of our entanglement before we registered our guests, heels up on the settees, faces blanched. We did explain what normal was for us, that we were trained, this sport. But they remembered that the babysitter couldn't stay too late. It is agreed we finished up the wine, the chocolate mints, but not whose fault it was, nor who had won.
Yeah, that's a great poem to end on. A really fun story, telling stories for Mari, who's going to be here on the open lines in just a little bit. Thanks, Frank, for being a guest. Just great to hear your poetry. I'm always a fan of your work, so it's really cool to hear it in your own voice and a good set of poems. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having me, Tim. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. And so don't worry about the instructions I'm about to give, because Mari can just sit in that chair and she can join us in a minute. But for everybody at home, if you would like to share poems on the open mic, let me pull up the screen. What you should do is email me at openmic, that's openmic@rattle.com. Email the poem so I can show it on screen as you read, then have your own copy with you and join the Zoom. And the Zoom will be right here, copying the invite link. I'm going to paste it into YouTube and Twitter. Only if you'd like to share poems, feel free to come on over into the Zoom. If you'd like to just listen to poems and enjoy more poetry, sit tight right where you are, and I'll be back in just a moment with that. The stream's not going to end. But if you want to share poems, come over on the Zoom link, which I'm pinning to the top right now. So I'll be right back in just a moment with Open Lines. And we're back. Thanks, everybody, for your patience as we get everything organized. The prompt for this week, and I should have said, if you want to share poems on the open lines, you can share anything you want. It doesn't have to be a prompt poem. It can be a current events poem, something about the news, something you wrote recently, something you wrote a long time ago that you just remembered and would like to share. Anything you want to share is free. Just share a poem. Hop onto that Zoom link and do so. But we did have a prompt for this week, as we do every week. And the prompt was to, right here it is, pick a poem written in a language you don't speak. Translate the poem, and that's with scare quotes, into English without looking any of the words up. So these are fake translations, is the prompt for this week. I am like 100% German by heritage, and I don't speak a word of German. So I thought I would pick a German poem, and I picked a German poet, which is right here, Bertolt Brecht. And I don't know anything about this poem, and so it's kind of funny, but here we go. This is Vom Ertrunken Madchen, and then it goes on, Alsi or Trunken, War und Hinter, yeah, whatever. I don't speak German. So I imagined what these words might mean and came up with this poem. I was thinking about the date it was written and thinking maybe it was like World War II kind of era. And so I translated it this way. And this is my poem that with apologies, I guess, to Brecht. Some drunken machine. We all drank the war. Oh, wait, hang on 1 second. Let me mute. Yeah, there we go. Some drunken machine. We all drank the war and swam in thunder across the backs of the fallen flowers, shining their opal hues with such a splendor, we like to think their muse was power. Tangled and held by such an awful air, as if a liquid veil had covered the world. But cool as fish swimming on a dare between fire and ice, our lives still swirled. In the homeward way a river bends, we reached into the dark of night and found a light. Through with hell, its surface breached, nothing left could knock us from that height. We were bleached limbs on a velvet wall of war. We gagged and languished, our stomachs filled with death's debris. Damn the hand that asks for more, and damn every ashen flower we distilled. So that was my fake translation of and if you have a shorter poem and you have the actual translation, feel free to share that too if you're doing this prompt. And so this was the Drown Girl. Oops, I lost the stanza breaks, but this is the Drown Girl. So I was completely my guesses of what the words were was completely wrong. The Drown Girl, and it's actually a famous poem that I had read before, but I had no idea that I was reading this in the German. So I'll read this now. The Drown Girl. This is the actual poem by Brecht, and the translation is by Timothy Ades. The Drown Girl. When she was drowned, she floated on and on, down the streams and brooks into the great big river. The opal light of heaven most splendidly shone, as if impelled to do the body a favor. Grappled and held by the water weeds and the slime, slowly and out of proportion, her weight increased. Fishes swam coolly along her limbs. Last tall as a fairy for green stuff and water beast. In the evenings the sky was as dark as smoke. With the stars by night it kept the light in play, but the brightness came on early, when morning broke, so she still had the start and finish of the day. As her pallid corpse lay foul in the water there, by God himself she was little by little forgotten, first her face, then her hands, then finally her hair. She was just more meat in the water, decayed and rotten. So that was the Drowned Girl, very different from my imagining as a war. Anyway, that was interesting. I don't know if they even call that a poem, but it was an interesting experiment. So I'm glad we did that. I hope everybody enjoyed it who tried. But now let's go to the total open lines. And Marie Dullaghan is here, as we mentioned. Hey, Mari, how you doing?
Just lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's
a
great.
bit of a surprise. It arrived rather last minute.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad we could have you share a poem. So what are you going to be sharing with us?
This is a quite an old piece called When You Are Dead, and it sort of resonates a bit after your talk of war, but it's not war related.
Okay, well, let's hear it. When You Are Dead.
I will not bury you in cold clay, your bones waiting while your flesh decays, worms in your hair and mud rotting your eyes. I will not bury you in the damp earth. I would rather send you to the fire and weep while you dance and play with the flames. Grieve while your smoke caresses the treetops. I will gather your ash in a clay pot or in wood and spill its greyness into the fastest river. Mourn while you travel on, down waterfalls and through bright meadows, until at last you arrive at the unending ocean. Its unceasing motion like a baby's cradle or an old man's rocking chair. And there, my lovely, you may have charge of all the wild forces of that open space. The explosion of sun, the cold of the moon, the exhilaration of unbridled storms, lightning, thunder, roaring wind, and soaring wave. You, the maestro conducting his orchestra.
And that was Marc Dullaghan with "When You Were Dead." So what? Since you're here, what is your journey through poetry been like? Have you been writing as long as Frank? And how much of a part of your life is it?
It's hard to say how much of a part it is because it fluctuates. Sometimes I'm very into it, other times I ignore it completely. The journey sort of started when I suppose I loved poetry in school, but to start actually writing, I was hanging around a lot with Frank's friends in Dubai and being very bored with the universe there until I started mixing with his people and listening at open mic events. And I found myself saying, well, I'm sure I can do as well as that.
That's great. And what do you think, what have you gotten out of it, through all this time? Have you, you say it's something you do off and on. What are the times that it's on have in common?
Right. I think it's about processing stuff, often rather sad or traumatic events from the past. And poetry is a strong way of exploring it. And because it's such a private activity, you don't ever have to share it with anybody. But often after you've formulated it into some sort of shape, it's easier to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And to share it and to share the experience as well as the words. So for me, it's about processing stuff.
Yeah, very well said. And I think that's really what we get out of poetry. I think that's what we all do. So it's so cool. It's so great you could join us on the open lines. It's always great to see new people, but especially when they have such a close connection with the guest for the week. Thanks for joining us, Mari.
Thanks, Tim.
Yep, my pleasure. Yeah, that was Marc Dullaghan with "When You Were Dead." Now let's go to Nivedita next. It's rare Nivedita gets to be live, or at least when she's rushing out to get ready for work. Hey, Nivi, how you doing?
Hey, Tim. I'm doing good, thank you. How about you?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you. So what do you have to share?
I did the prompt poem, but my translation was, I think I got it a bit close, but it was so bad that I didn't include it in this. So I'm just going to read the translation of mine first here. And then based on that, the original translation is even found on Google. It's even there in a book called Introduction to Poetry, which I didn't know when I started and chose this poem. So the poem I chose is called La Guitarra. It's a Spanish poem and it's by Ferdinand Lorca. So the only language I know is French. I know a bit of German. So based on that, I sort of took guesses as to what the words were. I was sort of close, but still so far, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
The guitar. The crying of the guitar begins. The cups break. The crying of the guitar begins. It's useless to shut it up. It's impossible to shut it up. Oh, the monotonous cries, how it cries. How the wind cries about the snowfall. It cries over distant things, like the arrow cries for the afternoon. The first dead bird sits on the branch. O guitar, a wounded heart by 5 swords. And then the actual translation is sort of close, but here we go. It's the one that I put as by Chat GPT because that's where I got it from because I didn't know how to find it on Google otherwise. So the weeping begins from the guitar. The glasses of dawn shatter. The weeping begins from the guitar. It's useless to silence it. It's impossible to silence it. It weeps monotonously like water weeps, like the wind weeps over the snow. It's impossible to silence it. It weeps for distant things, hot southern sand that longs for white camellias. It weeps an arrow without a target, the afternoon without a morning, and the first dead bird on the branch. Oh, guitar, heart is wounded by 5 swords. So
Yeah.
I would say I
that was
got some
pretty
of the
close.
words, but
It was much better
I
than
think
me.
the title sort of gave it away.
Mhm.
I think the title sort of gave it away there.
So what did you get anything out of this experience, or was it something you ever might consider doing again?
Oh, I definitely would. I think it's sort of interesting to figure out how far off the tangent you are with what you think the poet is trying to talk about. And it sort of tells you how many different interpretations you can have of just one work. Like you read it, you think about what you know of the poet, you think about the time in which it was written, and you sort of come up with, oh, I think this is what the words means by guessing the 3 or 4 words that you sort of know, and then see whether your wavelengths match, for want of a better word.
Well, very fun. Yeah, thanks so much, Nivi. Always a pleasure to see you. Glad you could be live for a change. Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. It was lovely being here.
Yep. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Yeah, that was
Bye-bye.
Nivi
Have a nice
Karthik
day.
with her translation of the Lorca's La Guitarra. Let's go next to Tom Barlow. I think Tom's been on once or twice before, right, Tom? Oh, you're on mute.
Been on the Friday Critic.
Ah, that's
Critics,
right. Okay. Well, yeah. Well, I guess it's your first time on the open lines. And where are you calling from?
Yeah. Calling from Columbus, Ohio.
Ah, okay. And what do you have to share?
I sent it. I think I sent that in a poem called. It's really important that it be shared visually.
Yeah, I have it right here.
Or it won't make it.
Yeah. So this is a Quiet Night Thought by Lee Bai, and so were you just going by the characters, not knowing what any of the characters meant?
Correct.
Yeah, interesting. So how did you even approach doing that? Because that's how would you know?
Exactly. I tried to look at each character and see what it reminded me of in the physical world or the in the processing. And I'm a little hesitant because I think I'm taking advantage of a famous poem that is so beautiful in its own that doing this process is could be an insult, but I went ahead and did it anyway.
Oh, it's just fun. It's just all fun. So don't worry about that. Let's go ahead and hear it.
Okay. I sleep splayed out now, for space is my new luxury. I once climbed ladders to pick pairs with my husband, but no more. My hair is spiked to show my name is not all that I am, though I wear a hat at work. I walk my daughter to school, watch her on the teeter-totter. Later, I will play hangman with her as a bribe for homework time. In the evening, I find a place to sit on the seaside docks and watch the boat taxis and the fish vendors. The rascal boys, always in such a rush. I carry the sticks of my language in a bamboo box in case a poem comes to me. Unobserved, I will assemble the words on the spot, then watch as they catch fire until my thoughts are mere scribbles. I stir the ashes just to be sure.
Oh, that's a great poem. And I love just, it has nothing to do with the poem, I'm sure, but it, stirs so much thought in yourself. It's really interesting to hear. Let me try to find a translation of the poem that we can read.
I've got one here I can read if you'd like.
Oh yeah, go ahead. And I'll put this up. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
It's very short. Bright moonlight before my bed. I suppose it is frost on the ground. I raise my head to view the bright moon, then lower it, thinking of my home village.
Yeah, great poem in that tradition by Lee Bai. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's really fun to see what comes up with this exercise. Thanks for sharing that, Tom.
It was fun.
Yep, take care. It was Tom Barlow once again with Quiet Night Thought. Next, let's go to Carla Schwartz.
Hi.
Hey, Carla, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm back on the lake. It's a beautiful day, a little gray.
Uh-huh.
Ben, and I'm happy to be here. And so the way I approach this is these approaches to translation I think are wonderful. But the one that I did was based on the sounds of the words that I thought were, if I could in any way pronounce them. And then I took that and I wrote, what I called my translation. And then I wrote that down as one poem and then modified it just slightly to make it a poem. And but it's still pretty wild.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like about this is the weirdness that comes out by doing it this way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I actually, so I did 2 poems this way. So I have a short one, a 4-line one after this one, if there's time. But this one is the first one that came out is by a Polish poet, Justyna Bargielska. And I didn't give you the translation except for my own, which you can see if you wanted to look at the work afterward. But my title is Dizziness at the Amphitheater of More Wistful Doggies.
That's great.
Call to the jockeys, see them, no, swear at them, watch their silliness do damage. Go listen for the odd lots, jest with their panties. Lassie sees neither size, be glad to see Nempsey, the jock full of moles, terrorize his beady, putrid bowels. What's this diplomacy? Interrogate each cute urge. Your juices neither mother nor breath proposed on a hammock. I just saw the beast on the nearest tree. Neither judge nor dust, just to talk. Be the promised land. My treasures eat and poemize. Fear not to drink your pride. Your pride is neither lily nor breath. I pose as my words a lazy, tiresome ne'er-do-well. Don't bed down prone, be glad to dodge they who aren't a talky busybody. It will cost you in wiliness, your wisest dimension.
Oh, very interesting. Dizziness at the Amphitheater of More Wistful Doggies, after Justyna Bargielska. Yeah, that's very cool. Why don't you read the other one too? The other one is
it's only
it's a
4
Brecht.
lines.
Yeah, it's a short one.
Yeah,
so
it's a Brecht, and it's only 4 lines. And the last line of that poem becomes the title of this poem. So, bed down under fur after hubby goes splat. Watch your house put on a dinner party. Drink yourself blotto, stretch, talk. Pick out the derelict gnarls from the stunning halibut. Be gay, all of you. You must, or worse, icky and stark.
That's very good. I like that poem a lot. It's interesting. This seems like if you ever have writer's block, like there's no excuse ever, because you can always just do this and then you come up with like weird something and then you can turn that into a poem and then you got a poem. So it's a pretty fun exercise, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for giving this to us because it was really fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I'm glad you appreciate it. Take care, Kyla.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. That was Kyla Schwartz with 2 poems. And now let's go to Guy Chambers.
Good morning, Tim. How's it going?
Good. How you doing, Guy?
Oh, pretty good. I got a couple of announcements here. I got a few poems being published here the last couple of weeks here. One that I read back in, I think it was the first start of the year, January, that number 175 there, a Park Bench Bench. Well, I got that published in the Stroll of Poets.
Oh, cool.
And I got another poem, one of my micro poems published in Parkland Poets that just came out a couple of weeks ago. So I got a couple there. And for these I got a couple of poems here. My first poem here, actually, I got published online in the Parkland Poets. They had a section they do in April, but they did every Saturday. They put about 3 poets on there with a poem called A Bouquet of Spring Poets. It's about poets about spring. So I put down one of my micro poems. So here it goes.
Cool, yeah.
Daisy. A daisy, dancing ballerina in the breeze.
Very nice haiku. I like that guy.
Yeah. And plus, I got another one I got published in my book there called Snowy Shadows. Snowy Shadow. An Arctic face, nosy aloft upon the edge. Ice breath, icicle stare, mysteriously burnished in a cool breeze. Sturdy, brassy skulker, glassy-eyed, stocky glaze. The snowy shadow howls, piercing the crisp air, seizing the winter moon. One brisk glance that sleeks away on the soft snow into the glacier night.
Very seasonally feeling. Thanks for sharing those, Guy. Always a pleasure.
I always had a picture with that one there too. I didn't get the time to send it there. Like I had a picture last week there I had with my one poem there. It's kind of nice, like putting pictures with the poetry sometimes. It's really good.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah. Well, congrats on the publications too. It's always good to hear good news.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care.
Yeah, I got a couple more poems coming up pretty quick. Again, I got a notification that they'll be coming out soon, so I'll be telling about them too.
Very cool. Well, congratulations, Guy.
Nice.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yep. So Guy Chambers with Snowy Shadow and a Daisy. Let's go to Dick Westheimer next. And Dick didn't think he was going to be here. He has a streak of I don't know how many shows he's come to in a row, but but we thought the streak was broken because he had some other plans for this time, which is not the usual time. But like magic, here he is. Hey, Dick.
Well, I'm sorry for the magic. The friend got sick, so.
Oh, that's sorry to hear. That's a bad news. Bad reason for it.
We had 3-day made pizza crust ready to put in the wood oven, and so that's what we're going to have for dinner tonight.
Yeah, well, that sounds good. Hopefully that the friend's not too sick. I know I've still if you can see off camera because you're on the Zoom, still coughing, even though it's just like a lingering can't get rid of it kind of thing. So stuff's going around.
Well, speaking of going around, I just loved that interview. Maybe it is the Irish mystique, but I just love the conversation about witness, especially, as something that I do occasionally. And it was a great interview. Glad I could make it.
Well, thanks. Yeah. Frank's just a great poet. I've always loved his work, so it's really cool getting to know him better.
So I did a very short Szymborska prompt poem, and I have a Poets Respond, one or the other or both. What's your call there?
I think you can do both because we have one Carolyn Cods left, and then I'll read some other poems for people who can't be here, but that's about it. So yeah, feel free to do both.
Okay, well, I'll start with the Szymborska one that I sent in via email, and it's I do have the translation, but instead I just thought I would put up, this is almost close to Tom's, Chinese characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't know anything either. Although I didn't know anything of German, apparently.
And I also chose Szymborska because in my poetics group, we'd done this before with a couple of her poems, just tried to bring them to the table like this. So I like the exercise. So my translation to however this is pronounced is this: Alzheimer's. A window opens to the park far below, all obscured by interminable fog, except for a small boy standing alone. He looks up at me looking down, beckons. I pull the curtain and forget.
Oh, that's a great poem, Dick. And I wonder, maybe you could read if you have the Szymborska there, could you read it? Because I'm kind of curious how far different it is. What I love about this exercise, and it sort of frees you up to do whatever you want. Like you have the excuse to be like, oh, that's what I thought. So like you don't have to interject any kind of, this is going to be a good poem on it. You're like, it's the ultimate excuse. And so it's fun to see where your imagination takes you when you don't have any, there's no investment in it, I guess, emotionally. So, but that turned out to be a really cool poem.
Well, and it became cooler, if I can say that about my own poem, after the end when I got to the last word and I thought, oh, this is about Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then moved back up to the title, which was, a strange reveal for myself.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's hear what it actually is.
Her poem is Example. A gale, stripped all the leaves from the trees last night, except for one leaf left to sway solo on a naked branch. With this example, violence demonstrates that, yes, of course, it likes a little joke from time to time.
Oh, that's really good too. I don't know if I like your poem or the Szymborska better. I like them both.
Well, for folks who don't have this book, and I love the cover, I just love her sense.
And that's is that what is it for everybody who's listening?
That's Here by Wisław Szymborska.
Okay.
I think it was written after she won the Nobel, and I just love her work. And I heard some of her work recited in Polish a couple weeks ago, and it's amazing. It is the most musical stuff I could imagine. The way somebody who speaks Polish, the translations just can't do them justice.
No, I'll have to try to find some of that then. Thanks. Okay, so what do you want to share from Poets Respond too?
So I did a Poets Respond poem, and I actually just want to read it because I find sometimes reading poems out loud at an open mic, I get to hear them in a different way.
Yeah, so definitely. Do you want to explain how the poem, what's it about?
Yeah, so this is one of those terror shootings, the one that the Outlet Mall. And I think what struck me and came out in the poem is, weird as it is, like this one sort of hit home as like, oh gosh, where can I not go?
Yeah.
As opposed to other people. I'm not in elementary school, so a shooting in an elementary, it's sort of like the Niemeyer thing. First they came for the socialists, first they came for the elementary school students, but I was not in elementary
came for the
school.
Outlet Mall, yeah.
And then they came from the Outlet Mall, and I was at an Outlet Mall. So that's this one. In response to being so long spared predation, and the epigraph is from Ovid's Metamorphoses. The poison plant grew on soil infected by Cerberian teeth. Mallard ducks return to Glenny's Creek. A mottled hen dabbles right behind her drake. He's so proud in his emerald crown. Their ducklings paddle in a tousled line, then scared by me, scut frantic down the stream. The chicks can't fly. They've nowhere to hide. It was always thus for ducks, always foxes and my kind lurking in the reeds, and stealthy mink that slide into their nests, pile up more bloodlet dead than they can eat. But mink and foxes dressed as men are the new rage. They have guns that shred flesh worse than Cerberus claws and teeth. They lurk in the weeds by schools and hunt in the aisles of stores and outlet malls and city streets. We are all ducks these days, sitting soft-bodied prey, waiting our turn to be taken by foxes, stalked and savaged at every bend in every stream. We and our brood glide through our days like ducks on Glenny's Creek. But I think to leave the streets to this new unhuman breed that whets its appetites on our ordinary lives. So I'll order my groceries online, scan the internet for deals, keep the kids inside, watch movies on my TV. We'll choose to be caged ducks and ducklings with no need to learn to fly.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. Great image there, capturing really a feeling that so many people have with all the shootings. And yeah, another good one. Always a pleasure, Dick. And I'm glad you could make it, even though despite the unfortunate reason for it.
Yeah, what a nice surprise out of a bad surprise.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Dick. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah, that was Dick Westheimer once again with in response to being so long spared predation. And last but not least on the Zoom is Carolyn Codd. Hi, Carolyn. How are you doing today?
Hello. Okay. You can hear me all right?
I can hear. Yep, there you go. I hear you. It's a little quiet, but I will turn this up and turn mine down a little bit to match. Yeah. So how are you doing?
Okay. All right. I'm doing okay. I have it's mainly a response poem to the month of May. And I actually I hoped to be able to do it right on May Day, but then I had another commitment, and I still have commitments on Monday evenings, but this is in the morning, so that was good.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah.
And I think this is more maybe a kind of a prose poem. And then I have a new mini poem that I think could be kind of a Sciku thing.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, let's hear both. Yeah.
Has to do with gardening too. So, okay. So the first one is Heart Flowers. In a corner of my garden, I'm going to put my glasses on. In a corner of my garden lives a bush of pretty pink roses, just a small potted plant when given to me by my fellow gardener friend before her expected death. She'd love to see how it's grown and flourished once planted in the ground with care. We had also exchanged a few other plants. These too are still in my garden, living tokens of our friendship which can be shared with others. If I move away from this place, these plants and flowers can't go with me, but will live on in my memory. In my heart appear other flowers, growing up from bulbs and seeds planted there by love. Many are often dormant and have their own seasons. They spring up, sprout, and bloom unexpectedly, prompted at times by a flash of memory or by a need for light and lightness to brighten up those hours and days of darkness. It seems quite natural to have flowers around when celebrating joyous occasions, birthdays, weddings, Christmas, Easter, but the appearance, appreciation, and love of flowers can also help us in coping with times of loss and grief in a gentle and even beautiful manner. Perhaps God created flowers for his own enjoyment as well as ours, and hopefully he finds delight in knowing that they aid us in dealing with our own feelings and in being more sensitive and caring in our relationships with others.
Yeah, beautiful poem. The heart flowers, a great metaphor for spring too. Thanks for sharing that. And then you have another one, the little haiku Sciku thing.
Yeah, and this just comes from a recent garden experience where I threw some seeds that were kind of left over in a spot just because I didn't know where else to throw them. And a few days later, they had already come up.
Oh, wow.
And I sort of forgot that I even put them there. So it's just called Uncertainty. Plant some seeds in an unlikely spot. Be surprised.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I like that a lot. Thanks for sharing that, Uncertainty. Carolyn, always a pleasure. I'm so glad you could join us. It's been a bit, so it's good to see you again.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thanks. That was Carolyn Codd with Uncertainty and Heart Flowers. And now I think that's going to do it for the open lines section, or the Zoom part. But we have some people who mailed poems in who are usually here or couldn't be here at the certain time today. Let's see what we have. So Lucy Chow. Lucy Chow included audio. So I'll download Lucy's audio. Yeah, I think in China it must be like 4 a.m. right now or something. Let's go to that's downloading. Let's see what Bishwajit Mishra did for us. So let's see. So he's got "Shut Is Your Door." Here, I'll put this on screen and okay. "Shut Is Your Door," translated from the Sumitranadan Pants Hindi poem Bund Tamhar Dwar. So here is this poem by Bishwajit Mishra. "Shut is your door. The sun comes smiling in the east with a luminous garland. The lotus wakes up in the pond. You keep sleeping at this time. Shut is your door. The euphoric breeze is immersed in virgin sweetness. The hum of the bees keeps reverberating. The songs keep flowing out of the avian throats. The redolence is weighing down the quiet flowers. Shut is your door. Oh, my life, the light awaits, and love turns into a doorman. The light is to shine the way. Love is to meet you. Shut is your door. Songs winged with joy transcend the sky. The soul's melancholy call can't find a way into the heart. Shut is your door. Today the aroma pervades. Honey abounds in a wide-open earth. Can you stop today the honeyed life's waves lashing at your heart? Shut is your door. Very cool. Thanks for sharing that, Bishwajit. Let's see. There's another very short poem that he sent too, which is translated from the Nepali poem Pagal by Lakshmi Prasad Devkota. So let's do that poem really quickly too. Crazy this is, and we'll do this one. We got a couple more too to share as well. So here's Crazy, translated from the Nepali poem Pragal by Lakshmi Prasad Devkota. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong, but here we go. Crazy. I must be crazy, my friend. This is how is my condition. I see the words, I hear the sights, draw the smell from talks. Rather than aerial, underground voices, I feel those things whose existence the people do not recognize, whose from the world does not know. That was Crazy, translated very loosely by Bishwajit Mishra. Let's see what else we have. So Katie Dozier's here, well, she's not here, but she's maybe listening. So let's see, there are two. Let's see, she's got two as well. So so she had the translation. Yeah, we got plenty of time. We have like 10 or 15 minutes left. She's got the translation. She chose Brecht too. I mean, that's 3 Brechts. I don't know. Maybe that comes up quick when you Google. But so this is here. I'll put this on the screen too. This is Schick mir ein Blatt, which is so it goes Schick mir ein Blatt doch von einem Strauß. If I'm butchering that terribly, I'm sure, but this is Katie's fake translation. Slice me with your pen. Slice me with your pen. Let it compose through the night a ballet of stars. With the planets, words dance until the darkness is struck with light. A volta inked by the morning sun. And so, and here's the actual translation, since it's a short poem. Send me a leaf. And this is translated by Johannes Bielhartz. Send me a leaf. Send me a leaf, but from a bush that grows at least 1/2 hour away from your house. Then you must go and will be strong. And I thank you for the pretty leaf. So very interesting. That was a Brecht poem. Interesting exercise. I'm wondering what Katie thinks of that. I don't think we haven't talked about that yet, but we'll see. And then she also included this tribute poem, which is something I thought was really nice that she did yesterday. So Doyle Brunson died. He was a legend in the poker world. And you might know that Katie Dozier was a professional poker player for a long time and knew Doyle, and the whole world kind of got together in a nice way and expressed gratitude. He was 90 years old and somebody that everybody in the world, I guess, just universally looked up to. And so that becomes a metaphor here in 10 deuce offsuit rain, which I think there's a lot of poker terminology in this. I assume 10 deuce. Actually, I know because I listened to part of this Twitter space they were talking about him. At 10 deuce, I gathered that he won some big tournament with a 10 deuce as his hold cards, which is just crazy. I mean, based on what I gather, because there's not much you can go on with a 10 and 2, but apparently he held that and won something. But anyway, this is 10 deuce offsuit rain, an epigram by Doyle Brunson. There's no life like the life I've lived. You're free like a cloud floating up in the sky. So here's the poem. In a world without good guys, he was the good guy. A collared shirt under that white cowboy hat and his 10-gallon smile posted above a shuffle of chips. Only he could flip breaking his leg into good luck. Instead of the NBA, he gambled his way with a super system, zoomed through saloons into the Bellagio's room, cracking one-liners from the seat of his scooter. How many times did his hands graze the felt as though it were grass? The no-limit curve of his shoulders raised on through the years, hunched puffy clouds over the poker table just to teach us to look up. So it's a wonderful tribute, a wonderful use of poetry, because people all over are reading a poem now who are just in the poker world and not in the poetry world. It's expanding the borders of poetry and putting a good use to that. So that was very cool. 10 deuce offsuit rain by Katie Dozier. And we have a couple more to share, and then we'll do the Sciku to close out the show. So it's nice to get to these poets who usually can't make it to the Zoom. This is Dear Blacksmith. Or no, this is Carlton Johnson, I should say. A new translation of an Icelandic poem, Iron and Rubber. And the original is Yarm og Gumi. But here is Carlton Johnson's short translation. Iron and rubber, Dear blacksmith, you who crawl here between the beds in the shadow of the newly hatched flower, I feel bad at 7 years old, your misfortune. Nor may you, at a general disaster, the rubber soul. And then here's got the original, which I won't even try to translate. But thanks for sharing that, Carlton. Janthi Rangan, let's see. Oh, she's just saying, so this isn't for the open lines. Let's do, we have Ted Guevara and then Lucy Chow, and then we'll wrap up the show. So here's Ted Guevara. He let go with this translation from the Portuguese. And the poet, I'm not sure, it didn't say the poet, but let's see what this poem has. Gosto. Here we go. This is Ted Bernal Guevara's translation. Gosto. I am a reviewer born in the wrong decade. I'd kill a fatted horse and let everyone know I've done so. But I don't feed to the masses, for they have a thin lining, ulcer-prone to leak out their meanest spirit. I have lost the snug fit. Ideal man puts on his shoe one at a time, but his eyeglasses all at once. I am a reviewer. I like things unequitable, to the best of my candid thought. I don't increase my intent maniacally. I'm not fragile like a flower. I am delicate like a bomb. So there's Gosto, I guess, by Ted Bernal Guevara. Thanks for sharing that, Ted. And now Lucy Chow will close it out. Then we'll do the Sciku. And Lucy Chow sent the audio, so I will pull that up. And these are haiku by Lucy. Let me pull this up in a way that everybody at home can hear. And here are the haiku, translated snippets from the birdscape, is what she calls this. Here we go with the, and I assume maybe Angie Minko, Out of the Mouths of Birds. There's an epigram, but here, we'll let Lucy tell you.
Here is me reading the poem, translated snippets from the birdscape. And I probably hardly do any justice to the transcribed bird sounds in this poem, but I will try and do my best, but still, pardon me, all the beautiful and melodious birds living in my vicinity. So here is a poem. Translated snippets from the birdscape. Birds did evolve their calls in songs by echoing the sounds of their environment, turning the ambient into the meaningful. Andrew Malenko, Out of the Mouth of Birds. Cabin, fruit trees, pond. Wings under the eaves, roaring like turbines. Chirping fur of zephyr, blackbird. Iori, chiri, cry, cry, chic, Cheerio. Bright in Cumbrio, red-headed tit. Whoa, wow, ow, wow, wow, wow. Quaw, wow, 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 quaw, wow. Ask, qua, qua, qua. Gray magpie. Saccadic skimming in search. Cyprine winged swallow. Glar, 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 glargle, glargle, go. Gurgle, garble, gargle. Great grebe. Melodic noise, caught in net. More melodic noise, serenade. Not a pet, not a pet, not a pet. Budgie behind bars. Curved beaks rattling against slivers of bamboo. And here is the haiku that I mentioned in my letter. Scanning the rain, drip drop, drip drop, drip chirp chirp. Blackbird breaks iambs. Thank you for listening, and I'm Lucy Cho. Thank you.
Yeah, that was Lucy Cho with a really interesting set of poems there. Actually translating birdsong. Translated snippets from the birdscape. I didn't realize that would be literal. That is really interesting, Lucy. As your stuff that you send always is. Thanks for sharing that. And I was trying to read some of it to the people still in the Zoom, and I forgot to take my little face out of the corner. But that's what I was doing, and I realized that I don't know how to translate the birdsong like Lucy does. But that's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Lucy. I think that was the last of what we have for the open mic section of the show, right? Yeah. So we'll wrap it up like we always do with a Sciku this week. And the Sciku, if I can recombobulate and find it here, the Sciku is based on this article from the Max Planck Institute for Empirical Aesthetics. And it's right here. So how online art viewing can impact our well-being. And so what they did with this study was they just took surveys of people before and after viewing online art, and they found that not only is it improve people's moods just to view art online, but also that there's a metric. What do they call it? Aesthetic. Your aesthetic. Where did it go? Your aesthetic responsiveness is actually a metric that somebody developed a while ago, and they could apply this metric and predict how much people's moods would be improved by viewing art, even in digital form online. So they looked at Monet's Water Lilies, and people who watched it improved or decreased their anxiety and improved their happy feelings by some degree that was predictable based on how much you're receptive to art. And since everybody watching the show, of course, is very receptive to art because we're enjoying poetry. It just made me think of how, you would benefit from adding art to like your social media scrolls, like follow some art galleries or something, and make art a part of your life because it actually helps according to this study. But here is the Sciku that was inspired, or that story inspired. Here we go. Bloom scrolling the web of water lilies. Bloom scrolling the web of water lilies. That is your Sciku for the day, and that is the show for today. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. It's been great, as it always has. Next week's prompt on the Rattlecast is inspired by Frank Dullaghan's poem, Small Town Brewery Blues. And it's to write a poem about a memory from childhood using Frank's form in that poem, which was if you remember, you have to go look back at that poem, but the first two, it's 3-line couplets, or 3-line stanzas, I should say. And the first two repeat the rhyme, and the third line rhymes. So there's a lot of repetition in that, like Frank was talking about enjoying. That's your prompt for next week, to write a poem about a memory from childhood using that form. And we don't know the name of it. I'm going to call it in my head the Dullaghan. But whatever you want to do, whatever you want to call it, write a poem in that form about a childhood memory. And as we mentioned earlier on the show, next week's guest is going to be Anne Casey, another Irish poet living abroad. She's in Australia. Her newest book, Portrait of a Woman Walking Home, will be the focus, but she has a whole bunch of other books and a whole lot of interesting things to talk about. That's going to be Rattlecast number 195, and that's at the regular time, even though she's abroad. She's in Australia, which kind of works out perfectly. It's like morning for her and evening for us, and that's great. That's going to be Monday, May 22nd, Rattlecast number 195. The regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and I will talk to you later. Goodbye.